Hey everyone, welcome to my first episode of Two-Player Activism, the show where we talk about the cool things people are doing to help their community and what we can do to help. And we do it all while playing some awesome video games. My name is Eric Hart, and today I will be interviewing the incredible Nash Turley. Nash is a biologist with the group Wildflowers, and they exist with a very simple mission: to help restore populations of native plants and pollinators. To do this, they have three simple goals. First, as the name suggests, convert lawns to native wildflowers. And let's be honest, having a yard of beautiful wildflowers looks way better than some boring ass green lawn. Look at this compared to this. And this compared to this. It looks like a before and after picture of someone who stopped sniffing paint. Second, educate people on how to identify pollinators so that they can help with step 3, which is have average people collect data on pollinators to assist with their research using their intuitive app. Links to the app and the Londa Wildflowers website will be posted in the description. I'm very excited to have Nash on today, so let's get to it. So you can go and talk to anybody, just go up and right click on them and you can have a little conversation.
Want to throw the old skin around?
He does that one point, ask if you want to throw the football around.
Yeah, figured.
But then he says, "Oh, I'm surprised you accepted," and doesn't do it with you anyway. So, Londa Wildflowers, talk about how you got involved in the project.
Yeah, Londa. So I'm a postdoc at University of Central Florida, and so basically I'm just like a researcher, just to do research on a project. And Lawn to Wildflowers is focused on working less of a research project and more of like an outreach project, focused on interacting with the public and educating people about insects and pollinators and wildflowers, and doing what we can to help encourage people to create wildflower habitat.
And how do you like participating in the actual conversion of changing the land
to the actual physical process of doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. The actual the process of just like to get out and do things with your hands is nice. Compared to as a scientist, we're mostly reading and writing and staring at a screen. So sometimes it's nice to do something real.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about the benefits of one single lawn to wildflower conversion? Like what kind of numbers are you looking at to see benefits in repopulation?
Well, that's something. I guess I'm watering while it's raining. That's pretty dumb. What are these black? Are these like seeds that? Oh, I never planted anything here.
That was me. I put some mixed seeds down.
Oh, I see. That's something that's really kind of a complicated ecology question that would take some pretty focused research to understand. Is that mostly hasn't really been done very well. So when talking about pollinators, it's sort of important to know at least one basic thing about their biology. They're insects that, as adults, they're herbivores and they feed almost exclusively on the resources that they get from flowers.
Okay.
So they're either collecting pollen as a protein source, often to then feed to their babies, or they're just drinking the nectar, which is, kind of like bug Gatorade.
Mm-hmm.
So that's their food. Like that's what they eat. And bees are essentially a wasp that has evolved to be an herbivore and to get all of its resources from flowers. So having flowers to feed on is completely essential, especially for bees and a lot of other pollinators as well. So that's a necessary resource for them to live. But then the other important resource is nesting habitat, because most bees are solitary and they'll live in the ground or, basically any type of habitat you can imagine. There is a type of bee that lives in that habitat. So like, for example, like shrubs and leaf litter, these rocks and stuff here, open bare ground like this is all places where bees can live.
Okay.
So to help bees, you need all of those things. Mm-hmm. And so creating a wildflower plot in what would otherwise be like an urban setting or a grass lawn, you're hopefully providing floral resources, which could be definitely helpful. And when you plant, most of the experience of most people and other research has shown when flowers show up, pollinators find them, so they are being utilized. But then the question how important that is a much more difficult sort of ecological question to answer.
Yeah.
So there's some evidence that yards that have more native plants have greater diversity of things. So, but it's somewhat hard to know if like they're just visiting or if they're actually living there.
Okay.
And that's somewhat of a bit of a difference between like if you're planting wildflowers, are you actually supporting those populations or are you just kind of giving them a snack now and then?
Mm-hmm.
And the answers to those questions involve all of the complexities of ecology, that's really based on context, and for the most part we kind of don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like in an urban setting, having, if a lot of people were out there with a lot more flowers, that means that there could be more pollinators supported in that habitat. And urban settings can support a lot of pollinators, but that seems to be likely dependent on how many flowers are around.
Okay.
So it's hard to say, like, you can't just sort of say like, well, if you plant these flowers, you're going to support 100 bees or whatever. It's really hard to know, and that's context dependent, and it might be more dependent upon nesting sites or things like that. But it's one of those things, like, it can't hurt. It definitely can't hurt. So doing what we can, and when we see that pollinators are utilizing them, that's definitely helpful. If that's really helping their populations grow or not, that's harder to say.
Okay.
If I wanted to give the easy answer of like, of course it's really helpful, but if we actually wanted the scientifically supported evidence, there would really need a big study of like some cities that have a bunch of wildflower plots and some cities that don't, and to compare and stuff like that. So as far as I know, those studies have not been done.
Gotcha. And what role does your Lawn to Wildflowers app play in this?
Yeah, the main goals of our app, which sort of reflect the main goals of the project overall, are to provide resources to help people learn about pollinators. So there's basically just some like really basic stuff of like, there are many types of insects that are pollinators. If you go to a normal person that's not necessarily super into nature or biology or whatever, they'd be like, well, is this a bee or a fly or a beetle? They might be like, I don't know. So one of the tools we have is a game to help people learn how to just tell apart the main categories of pollinators, which are bees, flies, beetles, butterflies, things like that, wasp. So it's a interactive, almost kind of like Tinder, but for pollinators, where it shows you a photo and you like say whether it's a beetle or a fly, and you go through all these levels, and hopefully at the end it kind of trains people, at least the most basic pollinator groups, so they learn about how to sort of recognize those. And then there's also a guide in there that just kind of gives some more information about each of those groups of pollinators. And so that's just more basic education about insects and pollinators. And then there are some tools to help try to make it easy to create pollinator habitat. So there's just like protocols for converting turf grass to wildflowers, so trying to make that real easy. And then the last part is the game trains you to identify these pollinator groups. There's a tool in the app that you can then, once you've beat the game, you can go out and collect data on pollinators. Like how many beetles did you see? How many honeybees did you see? And then that's, if a lot of people did that, we might start to have some better sense of, where pollinators are doing well, what parts of the country need more restoration, things like that.
To help answer those questions of like how many lawn to wildflower conversions are going to save 100 bees.
Yeah, I think best case scenario, if we had a ton of data, we might start be able to answer some of those questions about like how successful are urban habitats in supporting pollinators, and like how much natural areas around do we need to have healthy pollinators, things like that.
So how important of a problem is this to solve?
Yeah, it's kind of in some ways more dramatic than sometimes you hear, and sometimes less dramatic. So there's been some headlines about insect apocalypse where it's like all pollinators will go extinct by 2050 or something. And that's like totally ridiculous. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's thousands and thousands of species, and there's always species that do well with the disturbances we make. And so like there's no way that everything's going to go extinct. And also like a lot of our, it's something like 8 to 11% of our food is dependent on pollinators.
Mm-hmm.
So most of our most important foods don't require pollinators. So we could survive without them. So it's not the economic question, I think is important because they do provide a lot of economic value. But I think it's better to think about it from just a biodiversity perspective. We have thousands and thousands of species that have intrinsic value in themselves. So there's something like 5,000 bee species just in North America.
Mm-hmm.
And the evidence we have is that about half of them are seriously in decline in some extent. And those are all at potential risk of extinction.
Yeah.
If we don't change anything. So we're seeing just huge changes in the ecology and the biodiversity. And I think I'm sort of more inclined to just see the value in nature in itself. And that, this is, in the same way that we've sometimes been really concerned about a few, some species of birds and things. There's all these insects that are largely ignored that no one's ever seen or heard about, but they make the world work.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also just incredibly diverse and fascinating in their own right and sort of deserve to have their sort of intrinsic value be protected.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in terms of humans surviving, it's important. We could have our agriculture be a lot more efficient and environmentally friendly if we kept more of these native pollinators around. But we could probably get by without them, if I'm being totally honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more leaning into just the intrinsic value of nature. There's just a serious mass extinction event going on right now that I think it's our moral duty to try to lessen that disturbing extinction trend from happening more.
Mm-hmm. Talk about that moral duty a little bit.
It does get kind of complicated. I mean, I think the feeling that I have that humans in general have a moral obligation to, not allow tons of species to go extinct. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just sort of motivated by the idea that we're just one species on this planet. We all evolved through process of evolution, and what gives us the right to exterminate all this life?
Mm-hmm.
And the unfortunate side of that argument is just not very very persuasive for people that don't have like a strong connection to nature or much ecological understanding that we're just one species on the planet, or a realization that I think it's really easy for humans to think that that humans are totally distinct and separate. Like we all live in cities and big concrete glass buildings and stuff. We're not part of biodiversity or ecosystem functions and all this stuff. But all the stuff we eat, all the the rocks that come out of the ground that build our skyscrapers, all of our food is a process of normal geology and ecology. Like we're not separate from the ecological forces that make the world work, even though it sometimes feels like we are. So I think kind of like the setup of this game, you live in your office and it's easy to become completely disconnected that we are living completely dependent on ecological forces. So it's basically just a larger awareness that we have to live within those balances in the long term for our species to persist. Because the more we are under the delusion that we're something different and separate, we're just sort of doomed to a Blade Runner like future with Holocaust and like no wild animals left and just a horrific future. And I think realizing that we are biological organisms that live in a biological system is at the root of that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, apparently you can eat sap
I guess.
for 2 energy.
Oh, huh. Interesting.
Eat sap. Yes.
Hope
Yummy.
you got some water to wash it down.
I think I misinterpreted that.
Did you,
Minus 2 energy. Why would you want to eat it? Well, apparently I just...
You're the one who stuffed it in your mouth, so.
Okay, well, I should have noticed by the big skull that was next to it. But that
Gotcha.
would not be good for me.